Hi, I'm Lauren Kemp,
And I'm Bridget Price.
and this is Entrepreneurs in Progress. So transparency is often thought of as a form of currency. It buys you trust, loyalty, and stronger relationships. It can also yield higher revenues, reduce attrition, and build company culture. So in the art of being transparent, we're sharing our thoughts on this form of currency, our philosophies, and how we've implemented best practices around being honest, even sometimes to a fault. Bridget, what is your philosophy around transparency with your business?
I believe transparency is one of those inherent values that every company should have. It's up there with honesty, integrity, trust, being dependable. I think being transparent is super important, not only for who you work with, your employees or your staff, but also for your clients or customers too. And I think when you lead with transparency, it just makes everything easier. I know sometimes people compare transparency and truth together, like they're synonymous, but I think transparency is slightly different than being honest, especially when it pertains to business. So when you're honest, you could still be private or you can still omit things. But with being transparent, the goal is to be crystal clear. And I think keeping that in mind and not necessarily assuming that you're honest, means that you're transparent, allows you to really hone in on how to develop transparency within your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you say you guys land more on the side of transparency than not?
Yeah, I would say so. And I feel like in a way, we really didn't know any other way to operate because we are a consumer facing business. We have a lot of our information on our website. We have our service agreement, like things that are just laid out that we didn't think on operating any other type of way. So we definitely land more on the side of being transparent than not. And again, for me, it has made navigating our employees, our staff, our customers a lot more easily than hiding what my left hand is doing from my right. So that's a saying my mom always says, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. But both hands know what they're doing at all time.
That's great.
Yeah, I know. That's so completely random. Some old school philosophy there. But yeah, I know that other companies haven't always operated this way, like being more transparent than not. And I think we are seeing this shift with newer companies, younger companies, more progressive companies to be more transparent because people want to know what they're buying into. Point blank, period.
Absolutely. Brian and I are definitely like you and Marcus, where we fall more on the side of being more transparent than not. But I have found that is a little controversial. And I think I told this story on the last podcast, but it was just like when I had posted to Instagram about whether or not people should share their salaries, and employees, like everyone who said yes was an employee, everyone who said no was a business owner. And I actually had some deeper conversations with people who responded no to try and get understanding, because we're new. Like we're not saying we know what's right or how to do things. So I was very curious as to why people felt that people who are on the side of less transparency. So yeah, it's very interesting. But I think like you're right that there is more of a shift, mostly because people are wanting more of that. You talk about showing pricing on your website, which is something that not a lot of people do in your industry, right?
Yeah, that's one of the differentiating factors of our cleaning service. We're taking their word at face value. If they say they need a standard clean versus a deep clean, we have, I wouldn't say big warnings, but in our service agreement, we define what standard condition is. We inform them that scope of work may change upon cleaning the home. So once we get there, that scope can change right then and there. But at the very least, they're getting a taste of what the pricing is versus having to enter their information, click submit form, and then waiting for a call back. So we're providing some type of pricing range or gauge for them instantly. And I think a lot of people prefer that because it's convenient and they already know what to expect. When you send that form through and it says, okay, great, we'll be in contact with you. You're like, oh, like how much is this going to cost? And oh, great, now I have to wait for someone to call me. And It's almost when you apply for a job and you upload your resume and then they say, okay, now fill out a job application. Now I'm going to have to go through and basically provide all the same information I provided online once someone calls me, and then they're going to give me some astronomical price or some cost that I was not anticipating. And so to that degree, we're actually inviting the customer to be transparent as well.
That's great. And we do the same thing where we show our prices on our website. We have some standard implementations for projects. It might vary, but we do provide a range. And we agree. If someone comes to our website, a lot of people just want to look for a range, or like they're trying to do some research. And I remember when I was researching wedding venues and trying to find pricing, and every freaking site was asking me to give up my name and email, and I was just so annoyed because it's just such an inconvenient experience when it's just like, I don't even know what range you guys are in. It was such a pain. And
I don't even know if I should entertain this conversation. Should I just move on and keep looking?
Exactly. Like
I need to know.
It was such a bad experience because it automatically, that's one of my first interactions with this venue, and I'm annoyed. I'm already not happy with your processes from the get-go.
Yeah.
And, it's like people when they're trying to talk to a salesperson, and there's some people who just directly want to know the price, and salespeople dance around that. And it's like, no, if you're dealing with someone who just wants the information and they'll, come to their decision, give them the information.
Yeah, let's keep it real. With wedding venues, for example, we know that they're hosting a slew of weddings, similar capacities, similar asks. It's a venue, right? So there's only so much you can do within that venue. Why don't you just have ABC pricing, right? Why don't you just show what the base price is so people can decide whether or not this would be a great fit for them? Instead, they solicit your information to try to get more information from you and upsell you, or again, not being completely transparent about the process or the pricing. And it leaves you feeling, like you said, uncomfortable. It leaves you feeling jaded to a certain extent, annoyed. I think there are certain industries where they totally take advantage of the moment, like wedding, and they will not be clear about the pricing or circumstances. And that is super frustrating. And I don't understand people who promote a product or service, but then they don't promote the price. How much is it?
Yeah, sometimes it's scoping's hard, at least for consulting. If things aren't standardized and the more customized it is, then it's harder if you don't have a standard package or a standard frame of reference. And that's why so many consulting places go hourly or have the forms fill out and let's hear your project and we'll fill it out. And that's something that we don't avoid, we'll do it with people, but we have standard packages so we can show people our range.
Right.
And the more standardized you can make your processes, the more repeatable they are. It takes a long time to scope new projects and figure it out. So part of our transparency is it just helps our business run more efficiently.
No, you're absolutely right. And we've both worked in agencies where you can't really put a price on what this scope of work might be because there's a lot that might go into it. But it takes so much time and effort to get in or to develop that scope of work, to try to pitch that business, that you lose money on the front end. And if you don't secure that contract or that client, it's a sunken cost essentially. And some businesses budget for those sunken costs and the cost of acquiring business. I get that. However, yes, if you were to have some type of base, which does require automating your processes, streamlining some things, and making sure you can provide maybe even just at the bare minimum an hourly rate, you're already allowing those who aren't a good fit to weed themselves out. And I can't tell you, you're probably already familiar with this working in corporate or even in agencies where clients who have no business coming to you come to you asking for a scope of work or pricing or some custom project, and they can't afford even the hourly rate. They can't even afford the conversation, but here they are wasting your time, maybe trying to appear as though they have it together, and they have no intention on moving forward with you because you're out of their range. And I'm sure you guys have found that a couple of times in your business
Actually, it hasn't been so much a problem for us because we are transparent about our pricing. So I think that's a big thing. Like, people think maybe that by having the form, you're weeding out the people who are not as dedicated or interested. But I think that a better way to do that is by having your pricing. Like, people will know whether or not they're in your pricing. And oftentimes, like, I'll just like, no, I don't want to give you my information if you're going to be way out of my price range. So I think it does help determine the people who are more interested, because you're like, hey, this is our price. This is what our services cost, and it is what it is. And people can be like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm bought into that. Or they can be like, okay, no, you're not for me and we're not for them.
And there's nothing wrong with that. If we're not a good fit for pricing, our values, how we operate, whatever the case may be, that is okay. But I think that the sooner you provide that information, the more time you save and the better off you are. And it goes both ways. The consumer or the person who's looking to buy the product or service, they can go on their merry way, and then we can go on our merry way, and we can just focus on people that are a good fit. And I think sometimes people view transparency as one way. But I think, again, even by you guys providing that information up front, or us providing pricing up front, whoever is deciding to move forward, they're actually being transparent with us and letting us know, okay, this actually is something that works for me. And now we can facilitate and have a different conversation. Now the conversation is evolved, and we can actually get straight to it versus having to do this fact finding or discovery and all of that.
Yeah, because even if people see the value in your services and think that your pricing is worth that value, if it's not within their budget, then they can't work with you anyway. So I feel like there's just so many positive benefits to having that transparency around pricing. And I think that we were starting to touch on it a little bit about how our experiences trying to find pricing shaped some of our views around transparency. What are some of your guys' experiences that shaped those views?
I think that we both came from corporate settings or places where we didn't have all the information needed to, one, do our job the best way that we can or could have. We didn't have all the information to really determine if this place was actually a good fit for us at the time. We didn't have all the information around career progression and things like that. And then ultimately, we didn't have all the information around who was actually operating and running the business and how we technically fit in all of this. We got surface level things. And at the time, depending on where you are, it all sounds good. Then you get into the weeds and you start peeling back the layers. And you're like, oh, I was told something else, or I'm unclear about this. And so with our business, we lead with more transparency to avoid that. We want to build that trust. We do want to build loyalty. And we do want to make sure that, again, we can go to bed at night knowing that we are honest, truthful, and clear, and not like we've misled anyone. And there's still learning lessons there. I would also say experiences that have shaped our perspective around transparency within our business is also being on, we've also had unique experiences where sometimes companies are a little too transparent. and that's where the art of being transparent comes into play. It's like we get their intent on being open and transparent, but then sometimes the messaging was off.
Can you give me an example of that?
Oh, I'm trying to give an example.
Without throwing them under the bus.
Throwing any. Yeah. Let's see. I might have to come back to that because I want to make sure that it's eloquently stated without...
totally understand. That's fine. But I do want to hear about an example where you think someone was way too transparent and it backfired or didn't come off as well as it was meant to.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. But in that story, ultimately, sometimes when you're too transparent without refining or tweaking that message, it can do the opposite. It can make people really scared. It can make people nervous. It can make people question everything. So there is an art to being transparent. I think a lot of people don't focus enough on how to do that because sometimes their goal is just to be completely transparent. And that's actually where Marcus and I are falling within our business right now, actually. we're, like I said, we're transparent to a fault, but then now the question is, how are our staff members receiving that information? Is it the best way to receive our information and retain it? So we're working through that right now.
Yeah, it's
as we're
definitely
scaling.
it's a learning experience. And as I said before, like not everyone agrees with being more transparent. We're not saying that it works or that you should go this route, but we are advocating for more transparency than not. At least that's what we think we should run our businesses. But for us, some of the things that shaped our views around transparency were our experiences as employees, not feeling like we had enough information. Job hunting is another one where you don't know what the range of salary is going to be. So again, like pricing, it's trying to find like the job and the range that you're qualified for. And if you're looking for a job that's six figures, you don't want to waste your time with something that's $45,000 a year and you're wasting both people's times. So just another example there. And then we've actually been looking at other companies. So when we were, starting to form our views and philosophies and like how are we going to implement some of these things when we were bringing on an employee, we looked to other companies for examples for how did they do their hiring practices, how did they structure salaries and pay and weighing in experience and remote work and all of that. And so we actually looked at Help Scout and Buffer for how they structure their employee levels and salaries so we could come up with our own. It's definitely newer, and I'm glad that there are some companies out there already doing this. They're already have been like doing this for years. We're trying to copy that because we think that's a good way of doing it, and we want to see if we can make it work.
Yeah. So I guess my question would be, we have talked about our philosophy and kind of things that have shaped our experiences that have shaped our perspectives, especially when it comes to business, but what is the importance of being transparent? Like, why is it important to be transparent for you and Brian specifically?
For us, it's because our number one value is people experience. Transparency, we have found, yields to better employee experiences, better owner experiences, and better customer experiences. Yeah, ultimately, everybody we have found has had a better experience when we're more transparent about pricing, about hiring, about salaries, about operations and finance. We have found, at least so far, that it's a better experience all around, and that's our number one value is people experience.
Yeah, I would agree with that. For us, it's important to be transparent because we don't want to leave anything on the table. We don't want to have questions around how we operate, how we function, and obviously, I think the more that we are transparent and we're clear with our consumers, our employees, that makes it even more clear to us. And it allows us to make changes or tweak things and appeal to others' concerns because we're already operating with the best intention in mind. Obviously, sometimes intentions don't always land well. And it's all sometimes how the person receives that information. How we think we're being transparent might rub someone off the wrong way. We talk about how if your home is not in standard condition, the scope of work may change. And they're like, wait, what's standard condition? Or what's this? And then obviously everyone has relative or different definitions for standard condition. And we just have to lay it all out there. And then at that point, they might hear, oh, no clutter. Oh, you guys don't organize. Oh, okay. I thought X, Y, Z. So
we're at the home edit.
Right, we don't have big dumpsters and stuff coming with our cleaners to load
all the containers and labels. We're not coming in organizing your shit.
We default to deep clean. So if we've never been to your home, we have to assume it's a deep clean because we don't know the condition, and it just is best that way because at the very least we get your home up to maintenance level. And we don't come with any surprises. And typically, if you are looking for a cleaning service, whether it's your first time or whatever, you probably need a deep clean, even if you are cleaning your own home. That's just, I think. the standard that we're trying to push at the very least.
Yeah, because usually it's like, this has gone a little too far. I need professional help to come in because clearly I'm not doing it.
Exactly, because I'm not doing it. I don't want to do it. And a lot of people are like, oh, no, it's very clean, or I keep it up. And then you get in and their baseboards are all dirty. And they're like, okay. So at the very least, we try to default. So we've learned that even in the art of being transparent with our customers is by giving them the power to be transparent with us, sometimes they're not always clear either. We try to eliminate that for them and make it easier for them to choose this because you get this benefit. It's a value add versus feeling like you're getting the cheapest option right now.
Yeah.
And then we want to avoid the bait and switch, right?
Yeah.
And again, while we warn them and say scope of work can change no matter what, if they're still not mentally prepared for that, you get in that house and it's a tsunami has hit it, they still feel like they've been baited and switched. And we want to avoid that at all costs. So for us now, deep is the default when you're a new customer. And then
that's a good learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're growing at first, you're like, okay, fine, we'll do it at the standard because you're trying to get the business and the customers right. Then we've learned that from our cleaners, like they hate going to new customers' homes because they're not really reflective of the condition that they set in. And so we listen to both sides, and ultimately we want both parties to walk away feeling good. We want our cleaners to feel good about the work that they're going to do and knowing what they're going to get paid for. And then we want our customers to know that they got what they paid for as well, without any haggling or going back and forth the day of the service. Yeah,
because negotiating just takes up more of your time. Like so for an example of transparency, going into what does it look like in our own businesses. So there's transparency around hiring practices, which we touched on briefly, being transparent about the salary or salary range within the job description. I think more companies are starting to do that. We definitely did that. And then another thing, like we followed Help Scout's model where like this is your salary if you're like a level 1, level 2, whatever. We defined what's a level 1, level 2. It's based off your capability, not how long or how many years of you doing this. Like if you're able to do, this level, or this level of the job, that is what you're going to be paid based off of. And so the idea is if you have more experience, then you should be able to be capable of doing the higher level jobs. But another thing that we did that I also had at Help Scout, and I think I had this at Salesforce too, is no negotiating. I didn't work at Help Scout, but like when I was interviewing there, they said, we don't negotiate salaries. Like we have a specific algorithm and a way that we calculate what your salary is going to be. And it ends up being at or above market. So it's not like it's a lowball salary, but they just don't negotiate. They're like, we factor in all these things about you and that's what it's going to be. And I loved that because I hate negotiating. And I know that's what recruiters expect, and it's such a standard, and it's a waste of time because you got to go back and forth. It delays the process. It's just like, no, like this is what we're offering for this level. We factor in all these different things, and we don't negotiate the salary.
Yeah.
This is how we do things, and you are welcome to buy into that, and we'll pay you well, but it's fine if you walk away and that's not like what you want to do. But that's just one of the things that we did that I've seen other companies do that I really liked. Because it saves us time. It saves you the headache of trying to guess. And also you could feel like you're not like, you usually feel bad if you negotiate and you're like, oh, should I have asked for more? Or
you try to
just
figure
don't
out,
know.
you're trying to always figuring out like what you could have ended up with. And that I think is where resentment can start to build. So even before you start freaking working there, you could instantly feel resentful because you're questioning if you should have went higher or if they could have given you more money. And then I don't know how this always happens, but as soon as you accept that job offer in that range for most people, after you've gone back and forth and negotiated, you find another similar position that's offering more. And you're like, crap, like, did I mess up? And sometimes you might just be excited about working for the company, or you convince yourself that you're going to move up and it's not going to matter and yada yada. But subconsciously, I think that's where that distrust builds with employees that can be exacerbated throughout the lifespan of their career at said company. I think it's also telling when you think about hiring practices, specifically around salaries, right? A recruiter or someone will get you on the phone and tell you the range, and then they'll say, this is the starting range, is that okay? Or they'll ask you what your previous salary was. And sometimes that happens before they even tell you what the range is. So they're trying to get you to be transparent about what your previous salary was so they can shape your package accordingly. And again, it's already building that distrust around working for this company. So you want me to provide this information around my salary to you so you can shape my salary at your company without telling you what the range is? I don't think that's fair.
No, the previous salary should not matter at all. Like I do appreciate the recruiters that like say, this is our salary range, and they don't ask me like what I made previously, because it doesn't matter. This is the range for the role. And with negotiating, unless you are hiring me to be a negotiator, like why should my skills at negotiating play a factor into how much I end up making or my value? Yeah, like you're not paying me to be a negotiator. Like you're paying me to do this job, and now you're making me negotiate. And there's studies that show that men are willing to ask for more and negotiate better than women.
Yeah,
like it's messed up.
It's so messed up because the harsh reality is that they are trying to get you in at the lowest rate possible. That's what's actually happening. Then they tell you that there's all this opportunity to grow and so on and so forth. Like you're told that you can meet this cap, and you rarely do. And we know what the numbers are. Like you have to leave the company you're at just to get a significant pay increase. You can't, for the most part, stay at the same company and experience that growth. Some people are able to do it. All circumstances are different, but more often than not, you have to leave to get more money. And I think by not being transparent up front, you're already creating that window for people to escape. Like you're slowly cranking it open for them. So I think it's interesting that a lot of companies haven't learned from this, and it could just be this antiquated, traditional way of doing things with regard to hiring practices with companies. But I think you're right. You see it now. A lot of companies are posting their salary on the job posts. They're at the very least trying to post a range.
Yeah.
And I would say for people who are looking for jobs, I wouldn't freaking apply to any place that doesn't post their salary. Like
you don't always have the option depending on your industry.
True,
and yes, in an ideal world, we would all like only apply and support the businesses that do the best practices. I feel you on that.
That's very true.
I agree.
I would not apply to jobs that do not care to post their salaries. You get burned every time. And it's funny because let me tell you, in our business, that's one of the first questions that our interviewers or interviewees ask. How much am I getting paid? And we are not skittish about sharing that information. In fact, it's in our list of things to talk about at the time that we're interviewing this person. So we already have that mapped out in the conversation. It's not cagey. It's not this, that, or the third. Like, it's very clear. Like, this is what you're going to make.
Yeah, that's actually just reminded me of my first job. So I was working at an agency, and I'd gotten to the point where I wanted to continue growing and learning, and there just wasn't enough opportunity at the time. And so I started looking for other jobs. It's before I went to Scott's Marketplace with Marcus. So Marcus and I have actually worked together.
Yep.
Crossover. And I remember just going for a social media manager job with this other company, and the first red flag was they asked me, oh, how much are you making at your current job? And I like being a newbie, and I was just like, oh, so blah. I told them. It was like, what, 28, 29, maybe 30? Like, not a lot. Entry level job. And then I go through the entire interview process, and they offer me the same exact salary. And I was just like, okay, you didn't even try to hide, like, that you were doing that shady stuff. And then, like, I had known from, actually, Brian's mom knew the company because it was in the same industry as her. And she was like, she was trying so hard not to be like, they have a bad reputation, don't go there. But she just, like, very subtly, like, was trying to be like, just keep the heads out. And so I was like, okay, like, I have 2 red flags here. And I was like doing some research, and I was like, oh, there's articles. Don't leave your job unless you're getting like a 10% or 15% pay raise or something like that. And I wrote back to them like, no, thank you. Appreciate blah, 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 blah. And then they came back and, okay, well, actually, here's our counter. It'll be this much money. And I think it was that 10 or 15% that articles recommend. And I was just like, by that time, I was like, no, I'm done. Good. I don't like your practices. I can see the shady shit going on. I do not want to be a part of that. I end up getting a better job, a higher paying job by being more patient and not jumping at the first option when I clearly saw red signs. And I'm very grateful that I didn't do that, because sometimes you're so desperate to leave a job that you see the red flags and you're like, you know what, I just got to get out. And thankfully I was not in a position or mind set where I felt that I would take anything. So that shady business practices definitely formed my opinion about how to go about hiring, salaries, and negotiating.
Yeah, I think that we felt the same way. Like, in terms of hiring, we wanted it to be clear, concrete, and easy, right? Like, it should be an easy process. And if it's not, then there's some things we have to change or tweak, because again, the easier it is, the more efficient it is, and you can streamline the process pretty easy. We try to automate our hiring processes as much as possible. So literally, after every action, if they are fit, like, they get pushed to the next steps. It's like very limited waiting, because we want people to join our team as quickly as possible without that drawn out 3 weeks to a month waiting period that we often see.
Oh, sometimes 3 months.
Yeah, it can be really long. And we're in an industry where people are trying to work quick. They're trying to get their next position. And so we're trying to automate that process, streamline it, and make it simple. Like, almost, it's gotten to a point for us where, because of the type of people we work with, we try to avoid the interview altogether. And really, it's not about, especially because we're offering training and stuff, it's really not about what your previous experiences are. It's not about all of the details and the nuances. But now we're trying to see if you can follow these set steps, because we bake in there, like, whether or not they are responsive, if they're showing that they're reliable, dependable, like, those are baked into this without them necessarily realizing it. But if they complete all the steps, okay, let's get you going. There's no need to make them wait, or we want them in as quickly as possible, because we know that they're vetting other positions as well. So we have to be on our A game with that too. But yeah, I think that also makes it very clear. Hold up, stop. If this is not what you want to do, you can bow out. You can opt out at any time. And ultimately, that's the goal, to avoid wasting time on any part, on any of our parts. That doesn't always happen. You do get people who actually make it through the process, despite how transparent you are. And then they find out, this isn't for them. Again, not a big deal. Yeah. The sooner we know, the better. But you always will have people who slip through. And you just have to adjust.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about transparency around hiring practices. In our finances series, we talked about all of that. I don't think we need to rehash that, but just around sharing revenue numbers. We talked about the pie chart with employees of where all the money goes. Another area where transparency can show up is with investors, sales, customer service, those different areas. I can't really speak to the investor side as much, but Brian has seen executives lie to investors, and he's seen salespeople lie to prospects. And I think we've all been part of the customer service experience where we've been lied to. And we were not and you get like white hot rage at that point when you're on the phone for 2 hours, and then it was just like a waste of time. So transparency is not just about hiring and finances. It encompasses so much more within your business.
It really is a value, right? It's a mission. It's something that you want your company to represent, I believe. And it's funny because we are familiar with those standard missions and values: integrity, honesty, loyalty, compassionate, creative, all of these types of values, but you don't always see transparency. And I think that, again, people have defaulted sometimes to thinking by being honest, you're being transparent. And those still are two very different things as it pertains to operating your business and how you function. And again, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of Gen Zers and millennials are caring about how their dollars are spent. They want to know that this is a trustworthy business, organization. They want to peel back all those layers, and they want to know exactly how they're spending their money. They want to know what you believe in, what you don't believe in. A lot of companies, as a result, have forced companies to try to be transparent as well, or force their hand. So like on Yelp last year, with all of the social protests and Black Lives Matter and everything going on, they rolled out a new feature where essentially companies can be flagged if they've operated in a kind of discriminatory or racist way.
Oh.
And this created obviously a lot of concern for businesses, right? Because they felt fear almost of like retaliation. If the customer wasn't happy, or if even a previous employee wasn't happy, then they can now report these discriminatory practices or claims. And it felt for the business owner like they had very little reprieve. On my end, Marcus and I talked about this, and it's kind of like, well, don't be discriminatory, right?
Yeah.
It's easy, right?
Yeah. Don't be a dick.
At the end of the day, and even if you accidentally are a dick or an asshole, how do you make up for that? How do you recover? I think that's super important too. And for us, when we saw people get all up in arms about this, it's kind of like now we're hearing the other side, right? Because for us, that didn't shake us at all. Not just because we're Black business owners or anything like that, because what it's worth, we still can discriminate. That doesn't stop us from discriminating. But more or less, we know that we're going to do whatever we can do to remedy a situation. We're not going to leave it open-ended and people with a sour taste in their mouth. And even if people still walk away with a bad taste in their mouth, regardless of the experience or what happened, we're taking the steps, and we have a process to take the steps to fix it and try to make it right. And so that insight for us led us to learn how other companies are operating. And I don't think a lot of them are still leading with transparency, because again, don't be a douche, don't be a dick. Just operate with that customer or client experience in mind, and be aware of what's happening so you mitigate those types of issues and concerns. And companies really struggle with feeling like their hands are forced by being transparent by way of their consumers. And I actually appreciate that, because you empower the consumer, right, to make these choices and to hold these companies accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree 100% that people like our generation and more people want to know what companies' values are. You're seeing on company pages when people are looking to work for companies, they're reading their about us, they're seeing what values are important and seeing if they align, to those values. And it's definitely something that we're going to touch on more next episode with Thomas when we talk about businesses for good. But it's like we have a value. We have our values on our careers page, quote unquote careers page. It also being transparent about our values also helps us attract the people who have similar values. Like we know our values, we say this is important to us, and we mean it. We're not just saying it to virtue signal. So we're hoping to also attract people who want to work for us who have the same or similar values. So I think that, again, being transparent is more helpful than it is a hindrance. I feel like it saves a lot of time for people, and it's just becoming better business practices in general. So I think
it challenges you, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're transparent or make the choice to be transparent, you're challenged with addressing problems in a unique way. It's more in line with how a lot of these pyramid schemes worked, right? They are using other people's money to pay out other people's money, and it's all muddled and snakish and all of these things. And again, you can't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so it's like doing all of these just manipulative and sneaky things to cover your ass. Whereas if you are challenged to be transparent, like now you have to ask yourself, how can I actually make people their money? Like not using other people's money to pay someone out and then hoping that I get another windfall, but you're forced to reevaluate how you operate and run your company.
Hey, did you see there was this thing circulating around LinkedIn, like I think like maybe late last year, about this person, this CEO of his company was like, their business had been greatly affected by COVID. They had, lost a lot of revenue, and they were trying to figure out, like, what do they do for their employees? Because a lot of people were getting laid off. There were people getting furloughed. And so, and this seemed kind of radical, but they were super transparent with their employees. They were like, hey, they're a small company. This is the situation. Can anybody take a temporary pay cut just to get us through this time? You can decide what it is. And then once we're, back at capacity, I assume that they got paid back whatever their wages were. Owners were like, hey, how can we work together to get through this without having to fire or lay off people? And I just thought that was really cool. I wish I could remember the frickin' company now and see where they're at.
Yeah, I did read something similar to that, but I read across the board a lot of organizations, like their executive leadership took pay cuts to navigate COVID, and they froze salary increases and stuff like that, or bonuses. But it's really cool to know that the small company went to their staff and gave them the option of working together, as opposed to making that decision for them. And I think that is the perfect example of the art of being transparent. Like, this is the situation, this is what's going on. We're imploring you or asking you for your collaboration or help to get us through. And they empowered their staff members to be a part of this. And I think that's building that trust, that's building that loyalty, that's building that people being in sync with one another and looking out for each other. That's just building that company culture. And I am curious to know how they fared and where they are now, because those are really great examples of how being honest and transparent with your team can yield better results. And who's to say where they would be if they didn't come up with that idea? It's how you retain great talent and so many other things.
Yeah, and that's just another way that transparency can show up in your business. It can be in decision making. Some companies log their decisions for people to be able to see, like with the example that we just shared, it's a decision by committee.
Yeah.
And Brian and I have talked about this a bit, because this is one of the areas that's tricky, because sometimes you want to do that, but also as the leaders of your company, it's not always a democracy. This is an executive decision.
Yeah,
and
that's a great point.
The way you want to go with your company and what needs to be done. And I think you definitely want to take in opinions and perspectives. And it's such a hard line to figure out, when do you really need to listen to everybody and when do you need to stick to your guns and
right. And operate as that leader.
Yeah. How many decisions should be just yours and how many should have a lot more input?
Exactly. That's a fine balancing act, I think. And I think it's a struggle for a lot of leaders to determine how much they can share or should share in the efforts of being transparent and allaying concerns and fears. But also, as a leader, you have to sometimes make really difficult choices and decisions that really the opinions or ideas of others aren't factored or shouldn't be factored.
Yeah.
Because as business leaders, even though you make all the efforts, assuming that you are, to be transparent, they are still not going to know every little thing. They're still not going to have all of the information because it's not their organization. And knowing that, you have to figure out what decisions you ultimately make without technically the consideration or buy-in or collaboration of everyone else. And that in itself, I think, requires still some transparency, right? Once you arrive at that decision, how you communicate that or whatever. But transparency does not always mean the involvement of other people. It just means that there are limited or reduced surprises, I guess. Or at least sometimes transparency is really about knowing that you've built this trust with these groups of people, and they trust whatever decision that you make.
And being a good leader and being a good manager is hard when you're starting out, because we've never had manager training. We're still learning how to do a lot of things with your business. So if you're a young business, you're still learning all the ins and outs of operations, finance and stuff, and then you're trying to manage people on top of that, and maybe you've never been a manager before. Maybe you haven't been in a leadership type of role before. So it's one of those things.
I've read several management books, and sometimes it's so different than when you're actually applying those concepts. So different too, depending on the industry and what's happening.
And you're human. You're going to make mistakes. And I think it's like you said, the more trust you can build up, and like transparency helps with that, the more forgiving and people are willing to be. Like if you're trying to do the right thing, you're not going to please everybody. This is another thing Brian and I talked about. There are going to be people who are pissed at you and who will think you're wrong or won't like you and villainize you, and that'll happen. And you just got to be okay with that's going to happen. But I think transparency at least helps, like you said, with building that trust when you're not perfect, when you do make those human mistakes. Hopefully it doesn't spiral into a larger problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that transparency for us, like I said, is something that is a non-negotiable. That's just something we have to lead with. And I feel like it's worked out for us. We're transparent sometimes to a fault, like I mentioned. Yeah, when we've had cleaners who have gotten sick, or we've had staffing issues, or whatever the case may be, if we have to reschedule a customer, I advise our admin staff to lead with honesty and transparency. Don't say, oh, like, we have to reschedule you, and leave it vague. Let them know what's going on, because people can respect that. And if you're transparent with them, they're like, they didn't have to tell me that. They didn't have to tell me, like, this person was sick or this was happening within the organization itself, but they did. And they're more inclined to stick it out with you versus kind of giving some generic excuse or some scripted excuse as to why they have to be rescheduled for the second time. In really tough conversations, with customers, or even not investors for us, but just hypothetically speaking, I think when you are transparent and honest in that way, it's refreshing, and people know what they're getting. And that's always been helpful for us to navigate really murky times and tough situations. It disarms the other person.
And I think it humanizes your business. That's happened to me before. I can't remember which company did it, but some company had to reschedule on us, and you wait a week for this, service, and then you got to get rescheduled. And the first emotion you feel is annoyance and, oh, that sucks. They said, we're sorry, we have to reschedule you. This person has a family emergency. And I didn't feel as annoyed. Yeah, I felt annoyed. I was like, okay, this sucks that has to get rescheduled, but you know what? They have family emergency. Like, it's okay. Like, that happens. And maybe it's because we're also business owners too, that we're more flexible on other small businesses. But just that experience of, I'm sorry, we have to reschedule you, our person has a family emergency, is such a different experience than, we need to reschedule you, what times work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I have an example now about being too transparent with people.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So I'm going to keep the example that I experienced pretty vague, but kind of the impact of what happened. It was with a company that was scaling really fast, really quickly. We're drinking champagne or whatever the case may be, having company happy hours or going off site or whatever the case. But then a few months later, you're experiencing a scaling issue or some sort, and now you have to downsize. And so for a lot of people, obviously I think for a lot of companies, it's important to report downsizing or layoffs. Obviously you have your best friend who's no longer there anymore, what's going on, but it's contradictory, right? So you're reporting record sales or growth or whatever revenue, but then people have to get let go.
And they didn't say why?
They call it restructuring.
Restructuring.
So for a lot of people, they don't know what that means, because they're like, but I feel like this person has a need here. Like, how did they end up leaving, or how are they getting replaced, or whatever the case may be? And obviously you want to be transparent about what's happening or what's going on, but then if your messages are on the opposite ends of the spectrum, or growing like crazy, but we still have to let people go, it doesn't work. And it breeds this kind of, your messaging is so contradictory that now you're building some type of distrust in the organization. I can't trust that our sales are going, our revenue's going up, because now people are being let go. Another example, we're doing so great, and we're going to give you these crazy bonuses at the end of the year. Halfway or 3-4 months before the end of the year. Our numbers weren't where they thought they were, so we're going to have to take away your bonuses.
Ooh, don't promise people more monies, or something that, oh my gosh, that just seems like a bad idea.
Terrible idea, where you strip away this incentive
Yeah.
and without enough warning, because people at the end of the year, people are banking on that stuff. And a lot of bonuses sometimes are paid out the following year. At Marx's company are paid out February, March, because they tax purposes and all that other stuff.
First of all, I don't think they should be banking on their bonus. I think that's not good
agree,
financial strategy. But yeah, like
sometimes people are thinking like, oh, this will get me through the holidays, or this will get me this, or this windfall will help me with this goal, whatever
they schedule
it
a
is.
vacation and then they can't afford the vacation, or they take the vacation and then they're thinking the money's coming on the back end, and it's
not.
That's just poor planning, in my opinion. But
I agree, it's poor planning, but a lot of people end up, no pun intended, banking on it, and then to strip it away, it's
that's
again,
poor.
that's and it's not even that they're, again, this is where honesty and transparency is not synonymous. They're being honest about what's going on, but now they're being a bit too transparent because they spoke too soon.
I think the problem was the promise. Like, if you're doing well, that's great. Share your numbers. Hey, we're doing well. I would not promise like that much money until it's like, okay,
a lot of money.
Get to the end of the year, and it's more like, hey, we had a great year. This is what we can give you as your bonus.
I hate to say it, but it sucks. But even though they're well-intentioned on this goal of these bonuses, right? Like, when you tell someone a specific range or amount and that shit's cut in half, now people, they already felt entitled to the bonus because you told them, right, that you're going to get it. Now you've taken it away. Now you're it's like you're taking something that was supposed to be kind and well-meaning and a nice gesture for their hard work, and people are pissed. So that's why, again, being transparent and honest are two different things.
That's a tough lesson to learn. Because it's like you said, they had the best intentions. They were super happy. Like, that money doesn't have to go to their bonus. That money could go back into the business. That money could go back into their pockets. But they were so excited and happy, and like things were going well. They wanted to give bigger bonuses to people, and then it was unfortunate that it did not work out that way. It's tough. I think that all businesses, what I've learned, this is going to be another conversation, I feel, despite how big the organization is or how they come off or even how they're perceived, a lot of businesses are chickens with their heads cut off. They do not have their shit together 100% of the time like you think they do. There's lots of growing pains. There's lots of issues that haven't been worked out. It's just a way of business. And I am more understanding of that now than I was as an employee. But that's why I think it's important to humanize work culture, businesses, what their struggles are and all of that. And again, that is around being transparent with your team and what's happening and what's going on. So I know being transparent is a non-negotiable for you and Marcus. It is something that definitely Brian and I strive for and have many conversations around and push for. Do you have any worries? Do you ever think that you'll at one point have to pull back? Like, because we're both, relatively new, and this is a very progressive trend, and obviously we think it's going to work out, but at least Brian and I sometimes have the worry of, oh man, what if we have gone too far open and learned something that these other business owners know about that we don't yet, and we're going to have to pull back on what we've been doing and preaching?
Great question. I'm not worried about being transparent. I am worried about mastering the art of being transparent and how we communicate that to our teams. And in fact, like I mentioned earlier, that is an issue we're experiencing now. So I'm harping every day about how we're super clear about our processes and how things work, and our teams still aren't getting it, and I don't know what to do, and it's driving me crazy because sometimes their responses come off as though we're being cagey or unclear. And so obviously for someone who values transparency, I'm like, oh, I can't believe they're suggesting we're hiding things or not being clear. It bothers me. And then ultimately, sometimes depending on the mental space that you're in, you just think there's something wrong with them. Oh, okay, fine, whatever. They don't get it. But after having numerous conversations with Marx about it, if they are not understanding our processes, our procedures, what's going on, what's happening, that ultimately falls on us. I know I'm being transparent, but if they still are lacking understanding, I'm still falling short somewhere. and I need to fix that. So that's
Interesting.
what I'm worried about.
And then to round out this episode, is transparency effective? And I know you mentioned earlier that you think it's worked well for your business, and Brian and I think that it has, saved us time, built trust, and all that as well. But how do you really measure the impact of transparency? Because this is just all of our feelings right now. Like, I don't have any hard data that I can show you to be like, yes, this works. It's very anecdotal. It's very touchy-feely at this point.
Yeah, it's not tangible, right? Like, you can't reach out and grab it and say, yeah, see, based here, like, being transparent has driven up sales or done this or that or whatever. But while it is a feel-good type of value, I guess, that we have with the business, I think that it can be measured based on the impact that we have with the customers or our team, the feedback that we receive. I like working here because of XYZ. I think you guys treat us fairly. I like that the pricing is laid out and it's a no hassle process. So there's metrics that we can use to determine whether or not we really are mastering being transparent. I think that our reviews are an example of that. Beyond the actual full customer experience with how well the cleaning went or how great the customer service was, I think part of that too was being transparent or seeing our customers being transparent in their reviews. And I think it reflects the company as well. And I think you can measure transparency with peace of mind. Like I said, I can go to sleep at night knowing that I'm transparent. What keeps me up at night is making sure that our teams are receiving that. So I can sleep well knowing my intentions are being transparent, but then I have to, again, make sure that those intentions are well received.
So yeah, I think you're right. Feedback, like literally just people saying that they appreciate the pricing is upfront, or employees saying, just giving any kind of feedback, that is a way to gauge if your transparency is being effective. You could also try surveys. That's a way to get data, like, the 10-point scale or 5-point scale of how transparent
We've done surveys.
we are. So that's another way to get some data around it.
Yeah.
Maybe you notice you're closing deals faster. Maybe you notice you're saving time in other areas because you don't have to deal with negotiating anymore, or you don't have to deal with going through that whole process with a customer just to find out that you're not in their range, in their budget. So it could also be saving time is one of the things you can tell if it's being effective as well.
Wonderful point. I actually have an example within our own business of how we changed a process or modified a process to improve that transparency. And while we empower the customers to book on our website and get their pricing straight out the gate, we do follow up with customer verification calls. So our admin staff will call the customer to bridge that gap of communication, making sure they understand exactly what they booked, verifying the information, and then answering any questions they may have that they couldn't get answered on our site or didn't find easily in their confirmation email or whatever the case may be. That we noticed, one, technically increased sales, right? Because we find out, oh, you booked a deep clean, but you really want a move-in clean. Or, we find out that maybe you might need some appliances cleaned out or something of the sort. So that experience is improved because we're being very transparent. If someone books a deep clean thinking it's the same as a move out, and we get to them before we actually show up, right, on the phone, now they feel like they got a better understanding of what their services will look like.
Yeah, it's just a better customer experience. Is there anything else you wanted to mention in regards to transparency?
Lauren, I think that you mentioned this several times before, but I'll just reiterate, like, this podcast is us being transparent too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And we're being, I think, trying to be super clear in our ups and downs, our highs and lows of being entrepreneurs and our inner workings and what goes on in our heads as we're making certain decisions and dealing with some of the benefits or even repercussions of our decisions and navigating that.
Yeah.
That's ultimately our goal. I think we're doing a good job in being very transparent with our listeners and what our goals are with this podcast.
Yeah, duh. Like, this is us trying to be transparent about entrepreneurship and entrepreneur life. So,
Yeah. I love this conversation because, like you said, we've dealt with so many other experiences where transparency was opaque and it just was not there. So I will do a quick, I don't know what I want to call this, but we try not to give advice because we're still figuring the shit out ourselves. But to all the newer entrepreneurs or side hustlers out there who promote their stuff on social media and say they're selling something, and then when someone jumps in the comments and say, "What's the price?" and you say, "DM me," stop doing that. Stop doing that. If you're going to promote something publicly, have the price available. Don't make them go through another step of trying to find out what something costs. And if you can't, just link whatever you have to your website or something. Like, don't ask someone, don't have an interested person
jump
take
through
another
hoops
to get your product or service. Just lay it all out there.
And I think that's part of the mind shift from thinking about what's best for your business versus what's the best experience for your customer. Because I fall victim to that too, where I'll be like, Brian, like, why don't we do it this way? We could get more emails for marketing, or we could do this and that. And Brian's like, what? Like, that's not a good experience for the customer. That should be first, is think about, if you want to do something, are you doing it because it's good for your customer, or are you doing it because it's good for your business?
Man,
and hopefully they align, but
right.
You know.
That's the goal. Way of thinking about that. Definitely keep customer top of mind. We've seen so many businesses that operate with self-interests first, and I think you have a lot of people who end up being unhappy there. And so I think that's super important. And in that same vein, next in line to your customers would be your team members, staff, or employees. But they all should align. So I think that's a really great nugget.
Yeah. Thanks, Bridget. This has been such a fun
Lauren.
conversation. Thank you, anyone who's been listening. Like, subscribe, share, all the things.
All the things.
Follow us on LinkedIn. Me or Bridget individually. We're actually more active on our individual pages than our LinkedIn. So connect with us on LinkedIn. Follow our Entrepreneurs in Progress on Instagram and YouTube. And
Thanks, Lauren.
yeah. Alrighty. Bye.
Until next time. Bye.